conclude the opening half. To open the closing house, I call upon the member of government to the podium.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most important obligations of an opposition is to engage into the framework that the open government has set up. We think one of the reasons why there is a deadlock in the open house today is because the opposition side is refusing to engage into the framework that our opening government has set out, which is this. Now, the opening government came up and talked about, in a very philosophical manner, talking about how in order to save many and get the benefits of saving many lives, we need to prioritize those benefits, and therefore it's wrong, right? But the problem with the opposition is they came up mostly with what's happening in the Middle East. They talked about how, in international relations, because the US went in, there were a lot that itself was immoral, and there were wrong responses. We say this is wrong because our opening government was talking about how in a civil society, there is already an established trust within each other. They have a social trust that is established within. So we think that the problems that they bring up is wrong. And if we look at their framework, talking about how the West is going into the Middle East, it doesn't apply here. Why? Because first of all, the reasons why there was a lot of wrong responses inside there was because they were the people of Middle East, not the people of the United States. So they had many reasons to go to get that kind of responses. Why? Because of patriotism, because they already had a set value of anti-sentiment toward the West government. So we think that the problems that you brought up today itself is wrong and not fitting the framework that our opening government has set up. We'd also like to question how they say that we should not put value on a certain person and therefore we should not kill that one person. But we'd like to ask the government, what about the many lives that you are not willing to save? We'd like to ask about you saying that this life is more, because life is important, we cannot do anything. But what about the many lives that you are leaving out in that life? We think that that itself is wrong, and we'd like to question why you are setting a certain value on that, on weighing those values itself. Now, another thing is how my previous speaker just said that nobody can put a set value on a life, and we definitely agree. We think that nobody can actually decide. And so I'm going to rebut to this point with the extension that I have. The extension that I have is 2 points. First of all, the standard of life itself is not absolute. This moral value is artificial because it was made by the choices that we made on which values to prioritize. So we think that itself is artificial. The second point we'd like to make is why utilitarian calculus can be extended to life. Our opening slide established that the government needs to make utilitarian prices in the situation because they were a responsible government. We're going to explain how we can extend that to life. No, thank you, sir. So first, moving on to our first point. Now, of how the standards are very artificial, of how human life is important. Now, we think that the value of life itself, of which life is more important, is something that's not innate. We think, like you said, nobody can decide the value of life. We think that the value of life itself has changed within history, and also it is different from each society. For example, some states have the death penalty, whereas some states don't have the death penalty. We think that that itself shows that some states are willing to prioritize certain life values, while some states do not agree. We think that that value of life itself itself has to become onto the government. The government has the right to decide that for that itself. So we think that the governments also making that utilitarian, making the standard of we believe that the lives of many is more important is a valid one. And if the government decides to do that, then they do have the right to do that indeed. So moving on to the second point, which is why utilitarian calculus can be extended to life. Now, our opening government talked about how we can prioritize certain people in natural, disasters. But we're going to explain on why in society, why there are already laws saying that you can sacrifice another person's law. So we think that there are already laws that allow killing another person. The first example is the death penalty itself. This is based on proportionality, right? You take away another life, you pay back by giving your life. We think that that's already established, therefore showing that if you believe that this life is more important, then you can do so. Another example is self-defense. If you believe your life is in danger, and if you can go to a point that you can prove that, then you're justified in killing another person. We think that if this justification is already in the law, and the government believes that saving the mass is more important, then they do have the right indeed to say that since we think there are more benefits from killing the individual and having, getting the benefits of the mass, then the government does have the right to do so. Okay.
Bench, the whole government bench is ignoring one fact, that today the government is taking killing with a malicious intent and they are justifying for it. But there's no reason coming out. Why is it okay for government to be malicious?
Okay. Like I mentioned in my first extension, we think that the standard of what you believe is more important and what you think is more beneficial to your individual citizens and your government in a whole is something that the government does have the right to make. So we think that your question was actually a waste of POI. We think that, like I mentioned before, the government does have the right to do so. All governments have different priorities on what they believe should be a social value. And like I mentioned before, ladies and gentlemen, the social value is something that has changed throughout history. Who are you to say, because life is important, we cannot do anything when the lives of many is in danger? We think that the government believes that there's more benefits coming from the mass than they do have the right in order to do so. So we blame you because you are not engaging in the framework that our opening has made, and in order for you to win this debate, you have to engage and prove to us why those governments don't have the right to set that social value. And because we have done so, and because we have engaged into the opposition, I'm very proud to say that we win first, and therefore I am proud to be KU. Thank you.
Speaker spoke for 6 minutes and 50 seconds.
Thank you very much for the speech. I call upon member of opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in order to make this not a debate about different definitions and different contexts, the closing opposition here will win the debate by telling you why exactly, but firstly we would like to explain why exactly this model about killing, right, and about specific malicious intent is the clear and far more important debate, and why their side is not engaging, and also why even if theirs stands, they've still not justified it sufficiently. So we say that really the difference here is about a discussion about letting die and killing. Because what we are bringing to the debate here today, as brought up by Chian Lim, is that the idea of malicious intent is really fundamental to human beings. That when we make actions out of a clear malicious intent to kill someone or to do harm to someone, that debases us as human beings that makes us less of people, that makes us unworthy of life. Sit down. So, first, opening government. Right. First we ask, right, their context, as brought by Taeyeong, is that the life is like a trolley car. We say firstly, where is the trolley car? Right? Because really, when they brought up this contextualization, they tried to force this contextualization into this idea of disaster relief, right? To say that disaster relief is about 1 versus 100. We say that that really isn't the case, because this is a false dichotomy, Mr. Speaker. It's about saying that we have 1 helicopter and we save 1 or 100.
Corporation.
Sit down, right? Really, the issue here is about their kind of context, right? It's saying that the government, really, the real context, right, is that the government has limited resources, right? We optimize resources, right, based on the understanding that we try to help as many people as possible, right? The difference here is that we say that it is okay to try to save as many people as possible by allocating resources efficiently. It is not okay to kill someone who is in the way of another 100 people, because we say that that in itself causes the direct loss of life, right? Why is that? Because we say that the action of killing this person then puts that value onto the 100 people. We don't think that that is a responsible government, because that sort of intention makes them sit down, makes them guilty, and makes them clearly unable to be that moral agent that we would like them to be. Second, they brought this idea that negligence is also punished. Yes, negligence is punished, but it's not punished as greatly as someone who actively kills. Why? There's a clear weighting, Mr. Speaker, between negligence, right, versus active harm. That is the point that we have brought to you today. So that's opening government out of the way. So closing government. Now we have the extension, right, which was really at the end about benefits, right? It was benefits and benefits. That's the whole utilitarian principle brought to you. But they never engage with opening opposition about when the moral value is really higher. We also say that they claim that social value can be changed, right? There is a relative. Social value, Mr. Speaker, is based on the intrinsic value of human beings, about whether we have the right to survival. That is the key of morality, Mr. Speaker, and that is what they need to prove, and we hope that Junbin will do that, right? Because essentially, when human beings become seen as tools to achieve something else, then the government can no longer protect that. So, closing government. Okay, so now, what we are going to tell you firstly is about this idea about letting die and killing. So when we talk about this issue of malicious intent, what we say is that human beings' morality doesn't just come from the ability to calculate, right? It comes from the ability to be comfortable with self. It comes with the ability to say that you have made the best choice at a situation. It comes with the ability to say, no, to say that you have done done clearly and valued human life as it was. What we tell you is that when you choose to assassinate someone, right, at an unclear cost of an unclear benefit of really being able to kill, like save other people, then you're actively making that decision to say that this person's value, right, is less. You say that that intrinsic value cannot be like multiplied by 3 or 100. Close it.
So, what is your exact stance on those millions of people dying because of your inaction? And you said,
okay,
like popular support goes the same way, like either way. Like, either your action and your inaction is criticized in the same way.
So that is the point, right? Because how do we make decisions in society, right? We make decisions based on clear information. We make decisions based on rational decision. And that is the point, Mr. Speaker, is that when we have these kinds of rational action, then we are seen as a moral agent. Sit down. We are seen as a moral agent because we have done that decision, right? But when we make, exactly, this is the point that we are bringing to you, Mr. Speaker, the other extension, is that when we make decisions based on knowledge that doesn't exist, based based on an uncertain and something that hasn't been fulfilled in the future, we say that that is something that you cannot ever allow in society. Because what happens is that we expect individuals and states to make decisions based on something that has really occurred. That is justified true belief, Mr. Speaker. That is true knowledge. It's about having something occur and then using that knowledge to then become, to make those kinds of decisions. We say that this intention, Mr. Speaker, is extremely important. Because what we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is to say that why is it that when some blood is in your hands, that becomes something that we have to abhor. Because, Mr. Speaker, when you make the active decision, it becomes something that shows that you're irrational. It shows that you're immoral, right? Even if you save that 100 people, that's supposedly 100 people, it doesn't mean anything, right? Because you've lost your moral authority. You've lost that standing that the government should have. The government should make decisions based on what they know and not based on what they hope will happen in the future. We believe, Mr. Speaker, that as moral agents, governments cannot resort to all these uncertain probabilities. They need to have clear reference and they need to have a clear understanding of, they need to have clear intentions, and that is where we take the debate, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 22 seconds.
I thank the gentleman for the speech. To close the government case, I call for government speaker to reply.
Mr. Chair, frankly speaking, this debate is very, very sad. Why? Because, like from the opening house, it was very messy. Because the framework and the characterization in the world that opening government tried to depict was never ever engaged throughout the whole debate, like especially through opening opposition. Because the essence of this debate is like this. We use utilitarian calculus every day in our lives. We do the simple math, and we do economic transactions and whatnot. The essence of this debate is whether or not that utilitarian calculus can be expanded to the extent that includes life choices, life and death choices, right? Therefore, our opening government did a pretty okay job in establishing the framework of this debate. Opening government said that when there is one society, when government needs to sacrifice one individual within the society to save millions and hundreds and millions of other people, then the government should make that fucking hard decision. Opening opposition case is generally flawed because they were unable to engage this framework, and all their arguments were based upon the premise that one society and one entity, representative entity of one society, is killing a member in other social contract in other societies. Namely, the American people going into Middle East and dealing with terrorism. That's the innate critical failure of opening opposition, and that's why I honestly think that you will get fourth in this debate. You see, if you have ever debated against me or with me, or if you ever judged me, you really realize my pattern. I make POIs every 15 seconds. Sadly, I couldn't do so because opening house was too messy for me to clear up, and now I'm here to clear that up, right? So I'm going to first deal with opening opposition, then deal with closing opposition, and tell you why it is clear first for the closing government. So let's deal with opening opposition. They had 4 critical failures. The first critical failure was their whole argumentation was based on this wrongful premise that we're unengaging to opening government's framework to begin with. The first failure of the first analysis of their failure is like this. They did not engage the premise because this debate is not about what will happen in reality or not. We say that this debate should be philosophical debate about when that situation of government has to sacrifice one individual in order to save others should happen, then whether or not the government should make the decision. Their accusation of saying that such framework and such situations do not exist, do not evade their burden to prove otherwise in our framework and in our characterization. No, thank you, sir. But then I can give you analysis because our opening government was again insufficient in dealing with opening opposition's framework, right? The reason why the negative things and the harms of people targeting our own innocent citizens and and people like going crazy is happening under opening opposition's framework is precisely because the people that we are targeting are not killed by their own government, but killed by other governments. You know, like those terrorists are not killed by their own government, which they have trust and build up their relation to, but they're killed by United States government, Mr. Speaker. The reason why those innocent civilians and other citizens within the Middle East are outraged by the US actions and West actions is because they have cultural and ethnic background that are attached to their own social contract, and they have anti-sentiment against West, and that's what my member like wonderfully and beautifully talked about in her speech. But then the last response is this. So like let's take the situation, the hypothetical reverse situation. Let's say that there are terrorist action coming into our country, and let's say that there is a terrorist killing of hundreds and millions of people in our society. Like, this debate is a comparison between government's action to kill one person versus government inaction to save hundreds of people. Like, when we're dealing with which situation like invokes more harm and invokes more controversy and like criticism towards the government, we say definitely inaction to like save hundreds of people creates more harm in the society than to kill one person, because obviously in our society our citizens will want that terrorists to be killed by our government to protect our citizens. Therefore, this house was unengaging to the framework that we on the government side established, and therefore their argumentation is flawed. No, thank you, sir. But then moreover, like quoting from Abel's speech, he said that life is absolute and nobody can decide the value of life. No, we say that the value of life has been changing throughout history according to different societies. That's why we gave the example of death penalty. Of some societies, people think the death penalty is legit. In others, they don't think so. So we say that when society has different changing values, because ultimately those moral values are artificial and could be consented by the social calculus, we say that as the representative entity, government have the right to respond and like represent that moral value that is changing. Therefore, like we say that utilitarian calculus can be extended to the extent that it includes, like life. No, thank you, sir. Then, like what we heard was that active killing is different from inaction, like defensive, not saving people. Well, that's the point. Like, our extension material exactly shows you that the accusation from opening opposition was wrong. We told you that inaction to kill hundreds of people is even more problematic than an active action to kill one person. Why is that? Because the current legislative system and the current legal system is consistent with killing one person actively in order to save your life, in order to save other people's lives. I'm going to explain that, but before that, yes.
Sir, the point is you need to explain why that extension of your utilitarian calculus doesn't go to the situation of government treatment of individuals like terrorists.
Because, as I said, that this debate's premise on characterization and framework on our side is happening within one community, not interlinked with two communities or diverse communities, which is happening under your model, right? Let's move on to examine why our extension is a legit extension in terms of like solving the question that opening opposition brought to us. We told you, Mr. Speaker, what did we tell you? We told you, Mr. Speaker, that we have legislations like death penalty, which like applies the logic of proportionality. We also have given you the example of self-defense law, that when other person is actively trying to kill you, then it is okay to kill that person and is justified in the legal system. Mr. Speaker, all of those examples shows you how in the status quo, the legislative system is consistent with sacrificing one person in order for the public good, in order for the, greater good. So, closing opposition. Like, they have very feeble, extension. Like, Abel told me that it's bad because it's, like detachment of humanity and people lose, like sympathy and whatnot. Like, they took this as their extension, saying that government malicious intent is not justified. No, number one, we say that people recognize that government do not have malicious intention. People recognize that this sacrifice is inevitable, but it is a tragedy. Therefore, this detachment of humanity does not stand. But moreover, his analysis of information doesn't really stand because, first of all, like it's against our premise, first of all. But moreover, even when government do not have full 100% knowledge, government always makes a decision, and that decision is respected in the society. That's why we say that closing government takes first in this debate. Thank you.
Speakers go for 7 minutes, 21 seconds.
I thank the speaker for the speech. Now, close the debate. Let's call upon the opposition with the speaker to the podium.
Mr. Speaker, my job here today as opposition lead is to tell you who's supposed to win, right? And to tell you who's supposed to win, you have to look at the debate. The theme of the debate is the right thing to do. And when it comes to right and wrong, we naturally think of moral values, right? But today, coming from the government, one big missing part or component of their speech is the discussion of morality. The sheer avoidance of the talk of moral is unacceptable, or I mean, it's crazy coming from opposition. But before that, let's first give some response to Junbin, right? At his 7 minutes and I don't know what seconds, he came up with two things. First of all, he claims that people recognize that this act taken by government is without malicious intent. We tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the act taken by government comes at various situations. You cannot tell us that all situations do not have malicious intent. So let us look at the sit down, please. Let us look at the various situations. First of all, the situation of taking out this terrorist without the knowledge of whether or not this person is accused. Now, tell us whether or not this is a malicious intent when you try to, or you imagine that possibly the effects will be good and therefore you sit down. Secondly, you take out this terrorist at the clear knowledge that the person blowing off the weapon or the bomb on his body will cause immediate damage to surrounding people and therefore take life. This act, ladies and gentlemen, coming from the closing opposition, no thank you, is without malicious intent, therefore we concede it's okay. The third thing, ladies and gentlemen, is about natural disaster coming out from the whole of the government bench. Please sit down. The question again is whether or not the action taken by the government to let these people die is okay. We think that when letting these people die is not, no thank you, with malicious intent, but with intent that the government has no choice. The intent that the government has no clear indication that what is the best thing to do here, right, ladies and gentlemen, and therefore we fall back to utilitarianism, we fall under the shadows of morality. That is where we backtrack. However, Mr. Speaker, we think that the opposition here today is to argue that morality has presence in our society and that we should stand for morality at all costs, even at the cost, at all costs, as long as we can prove that malicious intent is within this context of government action, we should not take this approach. Yes, NC, go.
Since you said that life is the most important thing, then the moral evaluation should be about life itself rather than the action, like letting somebody die and killing.
Please sit down. Yes, now Taeyeong wants to bring me back to the value of life into counting of numbers. But Mr. Speaker, one response to that is, what if that person is you? Then this leads us to our clear, to our two summaries of today's debate. First summary is what is the essence of morality and why is it that us as government should stand by it, which was lacking in terms of principle coming from the opening half. And secondly, what essentially should be the government's role here, right? So coming back to the first point, my partner has told you that our society forms morality based on reflections. Reflections of clear indication as to what will happen. So for example, if today I am faced, no please sit down. If today I am faced with a situation of whether to kill Daniel or whether to kill the rest of the people, right? Then I take out Daniel and the rest of the people is okay. The rest of the people sees that the act of saving Daniel, killing Daniel, saves you. It reflects in clear benefits to you. And therefore that moral standard stands in our society. We say this is moral. However, Mr. Speaker, when killing Daniel, again, coming to the act, should I kill Daniel? Sorry, I keep killing Daniel today. When I kill Daniel, at no expense or no knowledge of the other rest of you, whether or not this is going to be good to me or beneficial to me, there is no indication or there will be no conclusion whether this is good or not. But more importantly, please sit down. I'm going to help my partner by explaining further to you why is it that moral values is based on what you guys recognize as benefit. Because ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, moral values are the rules that we come and concite. Moral values are the rules that we together as a society comes in agreement. The question here is why do we agree to, I'll take it in a second. The question is why do we agree to a certain moral value, right? Why is it that, oh, where's my time? Okay, why is it that, Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge killing is immoral? Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, because we form societies to protect our own interests, we form society to maximize what we can get within our life or possibly further. Now, in that kind of logic, right, what we could expect is by having such a rule, it garners what benefits most, and therefore we say morality requires reflection of what essentially happens. Closing.
If your logic is based on the idea that you cannot enforce anything unless you're 100%, like knowledgeable, then you cannot do anything.
Yes, sir. That is exactly what we are trying to tell you. We are trying to tell you that you cannot assassinate terrorists without the clear knowledge or clear view that is proven within trials. You cannot assassinate anybody within our country without the clear information, because that assassinations open up that slippery slope. That whenever I am in a position of unfavorment against the government, I may be the next. And the problem here doesn't just stop here. The problem stops when I possibly lose the interest of staying in this society, because it no longer means anything to me wanting to benefit from this society when my personal benefit cannot be ensured, cannot be guaranteed, and therefore we stand strongly for moral values. Secondly, what is the role of the government here? The whole utilitarian argument coming out from the whole government bench is about the continuance of the society, right? Essentially, they are trying to tell you that as long as we can save more people, then more people will ensure that our society can continue, and that will be a good thing. The question we ask on opposition side, which hasn't been answered, is it okay for this society to carry on with a moral burden that our society is less of a human, our society is less of protection? And again, coming back to this point of morality, right? We say that the less of human and less of protection falls back to the less of protection of your own safety, your own benefit. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, over and over again, we expect governments to become moral agents by having certain set of laws, right? Like, for example, in China, we expect people to go home and visit your parents, even though you live very long, even punish you for that, right? Why is that so? Because in that city or in that country, they believe it as a benefit. They believe it as something that they all want to garner in agreement, right? So in our case, coming clearly from closing opposition, we tell you, governments here do not exist for the fact of just continuing, but rather existing for the fact of protecting everyone's benefit, and therefore holding up the highest moral ground which everybody is inclined and agreed to is definitely more important. With that, we stand very proudly to oppose this ridiculous motion. Thank you.